October 1883. Redemption Creek, Montana. The wheel dropped into a rut, and Eliza's hand was already pressed hard against her right side before she could think to stop it. Too late. The man on the driver's bench didn't turn around, but he'd seen it. "Are you hurt?" No edge in it, no anger waiting underneath. Just asking, "I'm fine." Just the road, the automatic answer, the safe one. Silence stretched out between them. Nothing but hoofbeats and cold October wind cutting across open country. Then quietly, "There's a smoother route through the ridge. 10 minutes longer." "You want me to go that way?" Broad shoulders, eyes straight ahead. Not pushing, not waiting with his hand out for an answer. 3 ribs, right side. 6 weeks of running Boston to Chicago to the edge of a map she'd never looked at before. And now a stranger was sitting 3 feet away, patient as stone, waiting for her to tell him something true. The word no was right there, reflex. 4 years of reflex, but she said yes. "Please," he nodded. "Turn the horses." Didn't say another word, and Eliza sat in the quiet with her hands folded in her lap, unable to explain why 2 plain words felt like setting down something she'd been carrying. So long she'd forgotten what her arms felt like empty. This is the story of a woman who came to Redemption Creek with 3 broken ribs, 2 letters full of half-truths, and 1 question she hadn't yet dared to ask herself: whether she still had it in her to trust anyone at all. 3 rules. That's all she had left. Don't breathe too deep. Don't move too fast. Don't let anyone see. Eliza Hartwell had been running those rules for 6 weeks. Through Boston, through Chicago, through every rut and rock on every road between there and here. The stagecoach hit another one now, and she pressed her right arm against her side. Without thinking, held still, waited for the white flash to pass. It passed. She straightened her spine and looked out the window like nothing happened. Across from her, a man with a badly wrapped hand was wincing every time the coach swayed. Old cut, going bad. She could tell by the smell, faint, but there, and by the gray edge creeping under his skin. Her mother had taught her exactly what that hand needed: the herbs, the binding, the right pressure, and in what order. Her hands moved toward her bag. She stopped them, folded them in her lap. Invisible women don't get asked dangerous questions. She had learned that the hard way. People who notice things get noticed back, and she was not ready to be noticed. Not yet. The town was called Redemption Creek. She'd thought that was almost funny when she first read it. Now stepping off the coach onto Main Street in the October cold, she wasn't sure what she thought. Feed store to the left. Post office with a sagging porch to the right. A woman beating a rug in an upstairs window. A boy chasing a dog between wagon wheels. The smell of cut lumber and horses, and something faintly sweet she couldn't name. She stood beside her single trunk and waited. She had exchanged 2 letters with Cole Maddox. His handwriting was careful, even. The handwriting of a man who didn't rush. He'd asked her 3 questions. Was she in good health? Was she comfortable with ranch life? Did she have any concerns he should know about? She'd answered yes, yes and no. 2 of those were lies. She pressed 2 fingers against her midsection, checking the linen wrap she'd redone that morning in Billings. Still holding. Good. She didn't need a doctor to tell her the inventory. 3 ribs, right side, healing. Badly, if she kept moving. She'd been on a train to Chicago 4 days after the doctor in Boston told her to rest. She heard the horse before she saw him. Bay gelding, dark and solid, coming down the street at an easy walk. The man on its back sat like he'd been born in a saddle, broad shoulders, hat pulled low. He stopped in front of the post office, scanned the street once, and found her. She watched his eyes. That was the first thing she always checked now. The particular anger that lived just under the surface of certain men, quiet, waiting, looking for a reason. Edward had it from the day they met. She'd told herself she was imagining it. This man didn't have it. He dismounted, tied the horse, and walked toward her without hurrying. His face was careful, not cold, not warm. just careful. Like a man approaching something, he didn't want to startle. He stopped 3 feet away and took off his hat. Miss Crane, low voice, even. Miss Hartwell, now. Yes, Mr. Maddox. He nodded once. Glad you made it. The pass road's been rough. He glanced at her trunk, then back at her face. Did you eat this morning? There's a diner 2 doors down if you haven't. Eliza blinked. Such an ordinary question. Such a plain, human question. Edward hadn't asked her anything like that in the last 2 years of their marriage. You don't ask someone if they're hungry when you think of them as furniture. I'm fine, she said, the automatic answer, the safe one. He studied her for just a second, not pushing, just noticing, then nodded again. All right. Ride out takes about an hour. He reached for her trunk. She stepped back before she could stop herself. He went still. Neither of them spoke. Then, quietly, I'll put this in the wagon. It's just around the corner. He waited. Would you like to walk with me? Or would you rather I bring the wagon to you? She made herself breathe. I can walk. Good. He lifted the trunk with one arm and started around the corner, without looking back to see if she followed. She followed. The wagon was plain, clean, a working man's rig, nothing more. There was a folded wool blanket on the passenger seat. He hadn't mentioned it. It was just there. 15 minutes out. The road dipped, and the wheel hit something hard. Her hand flew to her ribs before she could stop it. She pressed down, held, and felt the slow burn settle back in. She was certain he hadn't seen it. He had. Are you hurt? No alarm in it. Just asking. I'm fine. Just the road. He didn't push. He looked back at the horses. Then there's a smoother route through the ridge. 10 minutes longer. You want me to go that way? The word no was right there in her mouth. The reflex. The small surrender she'd made so many times it had stopped feeling like surrender. Yes, she said. Please. He turned the horses without another word. The ranch was exactly what he'd described. Functional, clean, a main house with a wide porch, 2 barns, a bunkhouse further back. Inside, he showed her the room on the left, fireplace, a window, a small mirror above the washstand. There's a bolt on your door, he said. I put it on last week. She turned and looked at him. Before I arrived. Yes, something moved in her throat. Inconvenient. She swallowed it. Thank you, she said. You don't need to thank me for that. His voice was quiet. That's just basic. That night, she unwrapped the linen and checked the bruising in the mirror. Fading yellow, which meant healing, which meant time was doing what it was supposed to. She could hear him in the kitchen. A pot set down, water poured, a chair pulled back. Not angry sounds, she thought, just sounds. She crossed to the door and slid the bolt. Her bolt, the one he'd put there before he knew her face. She sat on the edge of the bed and pressed both hands over her eyes. One day in Montana, and no one had hurt her. She didn't know yet what to do with that. The coffee was already made when she woke. She stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at it. 1 cup on the table, handle facing left toward the chair she'd chosen the night before. He'd noticed which chair she picked. She crossed the room and sat down and wrapped both hands around it. Outside, the sky was just starting to go gray. The ranch was quiet. Biscuit was on the porch with his chin on his paws. Watching the dark like it owed him something. Past him, further back, she could hear the barn. Low sounds, horses, the kind of sounds that meant someone was already working. He was out there before dawn. She drank the coffee. Strong, real, nothing watered down. She gave herself a rule. 2 weeks. 2 weeks before she decided anything about this place, or this man, or the arrangement she'd agreed to in 2 letters she'd partially lied in. Then she sat there and thought, but what if 2 weeks is enough to know something? She didn't have an answer. She drank the coffee and watched the light come in slow and let the question sit. That was the first morning. 6 more like it passed before Hattie Maddox showed up. She came from the small house at the edge of the kitchen garden, 60 feet from the main house, close enough to see the lamp in the window from her front step. She was carrying a pot of butternut squash soup, and she didn't offer any reason for the visit. She just walked up the porch steps and knocked once and came in when Eliza opened the door. She was 65, maybe. Hard to say exactly. She had the posture of a woman who had spent a long time making herself small and had. At some point, she didn't advertise, simply stopped doing it. She looked at Eliza for about 4 seconds when they met. Eliza had the specific feeling of being read, like a letter someone recognized from the handwriting alone before they opened it. They sat at the kitchen table. Hattie ladled soup without being invited to, and they ate together. She didn't ask questions, didn't fill the quiet with small talk the way people do when they're uncomfortable. The silence between them was just silence. At some point, Eliza reached for the high shelf, reflex. She caught herself mid-motion and redirected to something lower instead. Hattie stood without a word, got the jar, set it on the table, sat back down and picked up her spoon. No comment, no meaningful look, no acknowledgement that anything had happened. When Eliza said thank you, Hattie said 2 words. I know. Eliza had to look at her hands. 2 words, and the woman had said everything. Sam Briggs found her in the kitchen Wednesday morning, coming in through the back for water. He introduced himself the way a man does, when he decided a long time ago that waiting to be acknowledged was a game he wasn't going to play anymore. Warm handshake, direct eyes. He had a story, ready something about the barn cat and a missing work boot, and he was smiling before he got to the end of it. They talked for 20 minutes. It wasn't a big conversation, just 2 people getting acquainted while she finished the breakfast dishes. He mentioned coming west after the war. Missouri, the long years between there and here. Missouri wasn't going to let me be a person, he said. Easy, plain. Montana isn't perfect, but it's the first place I've lived where I didn't need permission to exist on a Tuesday. No weight on it, no invitation to respond, just the truth of it, offered simply. Eliza turned that sentence over in her mind for the rest of the day. Permission to exist. She thought about what that meant, about how it felt to have someone decide your worth before you'd opened your mouth, to spend years trying to prove something that should never have needed proving, to make yourself smaller and quieter and less, because someone had decided your space was theirs to allocate. She understood that, just from a different kind of trap. Both of them had been told, in different ways, that they weren't quite a person, not fully, not without conditions attached. She'd never thought about it that way before. How many different kinds of that particular cage there were. That same afternoon, she was at the kitchen window when she saw Cole in the near corral with the gray mare. The mare was young and clearly unhappy about the situation. Ears pinned flat, circling the fence line, making sure everyone within range understood exactly where she stood. Cole was in the center of the ring with a halter loose in one hand. He wasn't moving, wasn't chasing her, wasn't pulling or crowding or raising his voice. He was standing in the middle of that corral with his feet planted and his shoulders relaxed, breathing slow and even, like he had nowhere else to be, and no particular opinion about how long this took. Eliza stopped washing dishes. The mare circled him, snorted, pinned her ears harder, circled again. He didn't react, just breathed, waited. 10 minutes, 15. The mare circled less. She slowed. She stopped altogether and turned and stood there looking at him directly, like she was trying to figure out what kind of thing he was. And then, in her own time, on her own terms, when she decided, she walked to him, put her nose against his chest. He raised one hand, slow, stroked her neck. Eliza stood at that window with wet hands and didn't move for a long time. She'd seen men handle animals before. She knew how force worked fast and efficient, and it got results. And something went quiet in the animal's eyes afterward that didn't come back. She had never watched a man simply wait, stand in the middle of an open space and breathe, and let something frightened make up its own mind about whether it was safe to come closer. She didn't have a word for what that did to the place behind her ribs. The closed-off place she didn't look at directly. She went back to the dishes. Thursday. New shelf in the kitchen. New wood installed overnight, she guessed, or before dawn. Lower than the existing shelves by about 8 inches. The coffee pot was already sitting on it, like it had always lived there. She stood in front of it for a long time. He hadn't asked her if she wanted it. Hadn't made a moment of it at breakfast. Hadn't stood nearby, waiting for her to notice so he could see her face. He just saw something and fixed it and moved on. That's how he says the things he doesn't say out loud, she thought. So she started talking back the same way. She moved his coffee cup to the right side of the table. He was right-handed. She'd clocked that on day 2. One less reach in the morning, before the coffee had done its work. She kept the lamp trimmed high on his side of the table when he worked late on his maps. She started making a second piece of cornbread at supper, without being asked, because she'd watched him want more and decide not to take it. 3 nights in a row, the exact same moment of deciding no. She was aware she was doing all of it, and that awareness unsettled her, because she knew what it felt like to track a man closely, to map his moods and stay a step ahead. She'd done that for 4 years, with Edward, memorized his patterns, the way a sailor memorizes weather, watching for signs hours before the storm arrived. Because the time between the signs and the storm was the only margin she had. This felt different. It felt like choice, like she was noticing, because she wanted to, not because she had to. She wasn't sure yet if that was true, or if she just wanted it to be. She held the thought carefully and kept moving. Friday evening. Cole was at the table when she came out for water. Maps spread wide in front of him, pencil behind his ear, lamp pulled close. He looked up. "You're not bothering me." Before she'd said anything, she got her water and stood at the counter and looked at the maps from across the room. She'd seen them before, never asked, "What are you working on?" Something shifted in his expression. The look of a man who didn't usually get asked. He explained it plainly. Harvey Sloan County Land Registrar had spent 10 months adjusting the recorded water boundary along the Gallatin Creek's eastern edge. Small adjustments, each one defensible on its own. Added up, they amounted to fraud. There was a survey on file. Sloan controlled it. Eliza held her glass and listened. "Is the creek year-round?" "Every month for 12 years, Cole said. She looked at the map from where she stood. "Good night, Mr. Maddox." She went to her room, but she lay awake, thinking about that creek, about her father's voice in the back of her head, explaining the shape of things like this. "Here's what the law says, Eliza. Here's what it should say. And here's the gap between them, and that gap is where people like Harvey Sloan live." She thought about it until she fell asleep. Rain came in the night, the enormous, clean sound of Montana rain, like someone had opened a door to something vast and just let it through. It filled the dark and covered everything. Biscuit shifted under the eaves. Cole was on the other side of the wall. She could hear his breathing. Slow, even. A man sleeping without anything chasing him through it. She lay on her back and looked at the ceiling. She didn't run through the exits. Didn't catalog the distance from the bed to the window, from the window to the ground. Didn't map the sounds of the house against a scale of dangerous or safe. She just lay there. It took her a moment to notice she was doing it. And when she did, she lay still and paid attention to it, the strange, new sensation of a quiet room that was actually quiet. Not the pressure drop quiet that meant something was building. Not the held breath quiet that meant she needed to be ready. Just quiet. "I'm not safe yet," she told herself. Don't confuse the feeling for the fact. But something was different. She was starting to learn the difference between a real threat and the alarm system running in her own body that hadn't gotten the message yet. The one Edward had installed, piece by piece, over 4 years. It was still running. It would keep running for a while. But she was beginning to hear it as separate from herself. That was something. She closed her eyes. Let the rain fill in everything else. Slept. Agnes Whitmore arrived on a Tuesday. She came for one of the ranch hands, Pete, who'd had a cough for 2 weeks that wasn't getting better. She came with a worn leather bag and no ceremony. And she examined Pete at the kitchen table the way you'd expect a doctor to examine a patient, which is to say efficiently and without fuss and with her full attention on the job. Eliza was making bread at the counter. She stayed out of the way, but she watched. Agnes was 57 or so, gray hair pinned back, steady hands. She didn't waste motion. After a minute, she said, without looking up from Pete's chest, "You've seen this done before." Eliza kept kneading. "My mother was a midwife. What did she teach you?" So they talked. Agnes asked her opinion on the cough. Was it wet or dry? Was there fever in the night? Had it moved lower? She took the answer seriously. She disagreed with one point and said why. She asked a follow-up question. In 20 minutes, Agnes had spoken to Eliza as an equal 3 times. Eliza couldn't remember the last time someone had done that without adding a qualification for a woman, given your circumstances, considering, just straight across, like her answer was worth something. Pete went to rest. Agnes packed her bag. "Walk me through the kitchen garden," she said. "I want to see what's still coming in before the hard freeze." They were behind the barn, out of earshot of the house. When Agnes stopped walking, she looked at Eliza directly. "Right side," she said. 3, maybe 4. "You've been wrapping yourself since before you got here." Eliza didn't answer right away. The wind came off the hills and moved through the dry grass and passed. 6 weeks, she finally said. "They're healing wrong. I need to examine you." Agnes sat up in Eliza's room. She explained each step before she did it. "I'm going to place my hand here. Is that all right?" Eliza said yes. "Tell me if the pressure gets to be too much. I'm going to move your arm slightly. I'll go slow. Tell me when." Routine clinical steps. Agnes did them the same way with every patient, Eliza could tell. But at the third question, Eliza had to close her eyes. Because the doctor, who came the morning after the staircase, the one the neighbor called, the one who came before Edward's family got there, had not asked permission once. He moved her the way you move a piece of furniture you need to. Assess for damage. He wrote things in his notebook and didn't tell her what he wrote. Agnes noticed the pause. "Still with me?" "Yes. Sorry. Don't apologize. You can tell me to stop anytime. We can do this another day." Eliza opened her eyes. "No," she said. "Keep going. Please." Agnes rewrapped the ribs. Correctly this time. She prescribed willow bark, tincture for the pain, and arnica for what bruising was left. Then she sat across from Eliza and folded her hands in her lap. "I'm not going to ask you things you're not ready to answer," she said. "But I want you to know something. My clinic is a safe place. Anytime, day or night." She paused. "I've helped 7 women in 5 years find a way out of situations that were going to kill them. There are Roots, Oregon, Nevada, places where names don't follow you. I'm not saying you need that. I'm saying it exists. Because women who don't know their options make decisions out of fear. I'd rather you make decisions out of knowledge." Eliza looked at her for a moment. "My father used to say the same thing about law," she said, "that people who don't know their rights can't use them." Smart man. Who was he? Richard Crane. Land law mostly. Boston. Agnes looked at her with new attention. "Land law," she said. "Yes," Agnes nodded slowly, like a piece had just fit somewhere. "How long ago did he pass?" 6 years. I'm sorry. She meant it. The good ones always go too soon. She picked up her bag, stopped at the door. "The ribs will be fully healed in another 3, 4 weeks. Good conditions, and they'll come back clean." She left. Eliza sat on the edge of the bed for a long time after. Good conditions. She thought about what that meant, what it required. That evening, Cole was at the map table when she came out. She pulled her chair closer, closer than she had before. "May I look?" He turned the maps toward her without hesitation. She studied them. Her father's voice was running quietly in the back of her head, the way it did when she was in problem-solving mode. 20 years of Saturday mornings in his office, listening to men argue about surveys and deed descriptions and boundary disputes. Her father's patient explanations afterward. Here's what they were actually fighting about. Eliza, here's what the law says. Here's what it should say. And here's the difference. She put her finger on the creek line, traced it east. This creek, you confirmed it runs year-round, 12 years without a break. Then Sloan's survey is invalid on its face. Cole went very still. Under the 1,876 Territorial Water Priority Act, she said, a perennial natural watercourse is a fixed natural landmark. Any land survey that affects water rights and fails to properly designate a qualifying perennial watercourse can be challenged as procedurally defective. She looked up. If Sloan's survey doesn't cite this creek as a fixed landmark, and I'm guessing it doesn't, because citing it correctly would destroy his whole claim, then the survey isn't just wrong. It's legally voidable. The room was quiet for a moment. How do you know that? Cole said. My father was a land attorney. I worked in his office for 15 years. You said you worked in a dress shop. Before that, he looked at her. The expression of a man who has discovered he substantially underestimated someone and is genuinely glad to have been wrong. Eliza, he said. First name. That's the argument I've been looking for 8 months. You'll need witnesses, she said, pulling the map closer. Sworn statements from people who can confirm the year-round flow. At least 3. Going back further than Sloan's survey. And a certified copy of the 1,876 Act from the Territorial Office in Helena. Dale Whitfield, next door, has been here longer than the survey, Cole said. He was leaning forward now. Something alive in his face that hadn't been there a minute ago. Pete and James, 7 years each, filed the challenge directly to the Territorial Land Commissioner in Helena, she said. Not through Sloan's office, not through the county registrar. The 1,876 Act gives any party in a disputed water rights case the right to appeal directly to the territorial level if there's documented evidence of procedural defect. You go around Sloan entirely. Cole sat back slowly. He looked at her across the lamp and the maps for a long moment. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when the commissioner agrees. She started stacking the maps into a neat pile, self-conscious gesture, she realized. He watched her hands. The wind moved outside. The lamp held steady. Neither of them filled the silence. After a while, I should try to sleep. Me too. Good night. Eliza, first time without the formal miss. She went to her room and slid the bolt and sat on the bed. I told him my father was a land attorney. I used his voice. It felt like opening a window that had been painted shut for 2 years. Pearl Dawes came Thursday to sell eggs. She was 22. She moved like someone who had learned to take up as little space possible, not shyness. Exactly. Training. Eliza knew the training. She didn't say anything about the long sleeves and weather that didn't need them. She didn't ask about the bruise at Pearl's wrist that showed when Pearl made change, and her cuff slid back. She saw it. Pearl saw that she saw it. They both looked at something else. When Pearl was leaving, Eliza said casual, like mentioning the weather. If you ever need a quiet place to sit for a while, you're welcome here. Anytime. Pearl didn't answer, but her shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch on the way down the porch steps. The involuntary release of someone who just received something they didn't know they'd been waiting for. She walked back to her wagon. Eliza watched her go. Late that night, Eliza was organizing a file of railroad correspondence Cole had asked her to sort by date. Letters, contracts, a few investment documents. She found it halfway through the stack. A letter referencing the North Pacific Railway's subsidiary land acquisition program along the Gallatin Corridor. Straightforward business language. She almost set it aside. Then she saw the signature at the bottom. N. Douglas Hartwell, Senior Investor Representative. She sat very still. She read it again and again. Douglas Hartwell, Edward's brother, the man who'd stood at Edward's funeral with his hand on her arm and told her quietly, politely, without warmth, that there would need to be questions answered. He was invested in the same railway company, trying to get its hands on water rights along the Gallatin. The same Gallatin, Coles Creek, Coles case. She sat with it for a long time. Douglas didn't come to Montana just because of Edward. She understood that now, clearly and coldly. He came because her husband's land sits on the most valuable water corridor in the county, and she, a woman who can be discredited, a woman with something to hide, is an opportunity. She was not just a loose end from Boston. She was a lever. She filed the letter in a separate envelope and put it in her room. Her father's voice again. You don't lay your cards down until you know what game is being played. She was beginning to know. 2 weeks in, on a Saturday afternoon, Cole asked her a question she hadn't prepared for. She was at the basin washing the supper dishes. Hands busy. He'd noticed, she thought he had, that she talked more easily when her hands had something to do. Less armor required. Less vigilance toward exits. Eliza. She didn't turn. Her hands slowed. Are you in pain right now? Today, the word no was loaded in her mouth. Ready. 6 weeks of saying it automatically to the doctor in Boston, to the woman on the train who'd asked if she needed help with her trunk, to Cole twice already when he'd noticed her reaching wrong. No, I'm fine. Just the road. 6 weeks of no until the word had almost stopped meaning anything. He wasn't pressuring her. He was just asking, directly, without softening it or hiding it inside something else. The way you'd ask if a fence line was holding. Yes, she said, small word, strange in her mouth, like something that had forgotten how to live in open air. Some, more than usual today. He nodded once. No alarm, no pity, no flood of questions. Is there anything that makes it worse that I should know about, so I can avoid it? She thought of the high shelf, the uneven ground along the east fence, the way reaching too fast lit her up from the inside. Reaching overhead, she said, uneven ground. Okay, I'll keep that in mind. He turned toward the door. She heard herself say his name, Cole. He stopped, looked back. That's the first time I've told anyone that I'm in pain, except the doctor. He stood still for a moment. I'm glad you told me, he said quietly. Didn't make more of it than it was. Thank you. He went back outside. She turned to the basin and pressed both wet hands flat against the edge and stood there breathing. The ribs were the same ache, same slow burn. Nothing had changed in her body, but something had moved. Small, fragile, like a green shoot coming up through frost, kind you're almost afraid to look at directly, in case looking breaks it. She didn't push it away this time. She just let it be. Sunday, Cole was in the south field all afternoon. Hattie came for coffee and stayed. They sat across the kitchen table from each other. And Hattie was quiet for a while, the comfortable quiet of a woman who didn't feel any need to fill silence. Just sat and drank her coffee and looked out the window at the hills. Then she began to talk. She didn't frame it as advice, didn't say, I think you should hear this. She just began, in the same even tone she used for everything, like she was describing the weather last winter. She told Eliza about 22 years. It didn't start with him hitting me, she said. I want you to understand that. It started with him managing things. The money. Which women were the right kind of friends for me to have. What I should wear to certain places and what I should not say in certain company. He said it was because he knew better, that he understood the world and I was too emotional to see it clearly. She set down her cup. I believed him for longer than I'm comfortable saying out loud, because I wanted to believe someone who seemed certain. I wasn't certain of anything back then, and certain felt like safety. Eliza's coffee was untouched and cooling. The first time he hit me, I told myself it was an isolated event. There had been reasons, I had done something to provoke it. That's what they make you. Think that there are reasons. That if you adjust, if you change, if you get small enough and quiet enough, the reasons will stop. She looked at Eliza directly. What I didn't understand then is that the reasons are not the point. The point is that he decided he was allowed to. And nothing I did or didn't do could change a decision I had no part in making. The kitchen was very quiet. Why didn't you leave? Eliza asked. Where was I going? My family was 3 days' ride. My money was his money. My friends were women he'd chosen, which meant they were women who wouldn't have believed me. And the church told me the sanctity of marriage was my cross to carry. She was quiet a moment. Cole was 14 when it changed. Rufus came at me in the kitchen. Cole walked in from outside and stood between us. Just stood there, nothing in his hands. Just stood there and looked his father in the eye. Did it work? Rufus never touched me again. He left the following spring. I never tried to find out where he went. She looked at Eliza the way she'd looked at her that first day. That complete, knowing look. I'm not telling you this to compare. Every person's story is their own. I'm telling you because Cole has spent 22 years making sure he became someone different. Not because anyone told him to. Because at 14 years old, he looked at what his father was, and he decided on his own, with nothing backing him up that was not what he was going to be. Pause, that's not a small thing. And it didn't happen automatically. It's a decision he's made every single day since. She picked up her cup and finished her coffee. I thought you should know that. Monday came in hard. Eliza was in the kitchen garden around noon, checking for anything worth pulling before the freeze. When the sky dropped, not gradual, just dropped. A wall of white out of nowhere, visibility gone in about 30 seconds. The temperature fell like something had been cut. She stayed still, her father's voice. Worst thing you can do when you lose your bearings is move. You make it worse. You stand still and you think. She stood still, controlled her breathing. The cold hit the cracked ribs in a specific, grinding way. The cold always made it sharper. She could not see the fence line, could not see the house. Then she heard him calling her name, not panicked, just loud, clear, giving her a direction. Walk toward my voice. Don't run. She walked. He found her in about 45 seconds, materialized out of the white, with his coat already open. He put it around her shoulders before she could object. I've got the fence line, he said. Keep your hand on my arm. He didn't grab her wrist, didn't take her hand. He held out his arm at an angle that made it her choice whether to take it. She took it. They walked back through the white together, close enough that she could feel the heat of him through her sleeve. The fence line appeared, then the porch, then the door. Inside, he went straight to the stove and built the fire up. You all right? Yes, your side. Fine, he nodded, poured her coffee, set it on the table, and went to hang his coat. She sat down and wrapped both hands around the cup. Outside the window, the world was completely white and silent. She sat in the warm kitchen and watched it and thought about the moment he'd held out his arm. Not grabbed, not pulled, just offered, and waited. He came looking for me, she thought, not to control where I was, not to verify my location, because I was in the snow, and he had the ability to help, and that was enough reason. She was almost 30 years old. She was only now learning how to tell the difference between those two things. The fire crackled. The snow fell. Cole came back through and sat at the table with his own coffee, and neither of them said anything for a while. It was a good kind of quiet, the kind she was beginning to trust. Agnes found her after Sunday service. Eliza and Hattie had walked into town for the first time together. Hattie's idea, offered simply. No pressure behind it. The church was small, white clapboard, a potbelly stove in the back corner, doing its best against the November cold. Eliza sat in the third pew and watched the room the way she always watched rooms. Cataloging, measuring. He came in late, took a seat in the back row. Dark suit, too fine for Montana, too Eastern for November. He sat, with the settled patience of a man who didn't worry about what rooms thought of him. She knew him before she saw his face, the shape of him, the way he held his shoulders. Douglas Hartwell was 52 years old, and he had none of Edward's surface warmth. What he had instead was something more dangerous in certain rooms. The settled authority of a man who had never seriously been told no. He saw her before she saw him. She was sure of that later. And he didn't approach, didn't look directly at her through the service. Just sat in the back row with his hands folded in his lap, like a man who had come to pray. He hadn't come to pray. Agnes appeared at her elbow on the walkout, moving through the crowd with the efficiency of someone who had something to say, and a small window to say it. That man has been in town since Friday, she said quietly. He was at the land office Thursday asking about Cole's water case. He paid a call on Harvey Sloan yesterday afternoon. Eliza kept walking, kept her face neutral. He brought someone with him, Agnes continued, a man named Carl Breckett from Missouri. He's been asking around about one of Cole's ranch hands. Sam, Eliza said. Yes. They walked another few steps. Keep me informed, Eliza said. Agnes peeled away toward the apothecary. Hattie fell back into step beside Eliza, and they walked in silence toward the wagon. And neither of them said what they were both thinking. Thursday, Breckett made his move. Sam was at the general store for supplies. Flour, rope, 2 boxes of matches. He was at the counter when Breckett walked in. And the way Breckett walked in deliberate, unhurried, with a particular kind of confidence, Sam recognized immediately. 9 years in Montana hadn't erased the pattern recognition. Probably nothing ever would. Breckett introduced himself to the room as much as to Sam. Carl Breckett, St. Louis, former landowner in Missouri, here to collect on a debt that Samuel Briggs owed him from before the war. He dressed it up in legal-sounding language. Words like obligation and prior claim and outstanding settlement, designed to sound official to people who didn't know the architecture of it. There were 6 people in the store. 2 of them had known Sam for 9 years. 4 of them did nothing. Sam stood very still. He'd stood this still before. He knew what the stillness cost and what it protected. Eliza was there. She'd come for flour herself, half an hour before she'd planned to, because something Agnes had said that morning sat wrong, and she'd decided to be in town. She heard Breckett's claim. She ran it through what her father had put in her head and came out the other side in about 4 seconds. She set her flour on the counter. The 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution was ratified December 6th, 1865, she said, clear and level, her father's voice coming through her like light through glass. It abolished slavery and involuntary servitude in every form. It voided all prior claims of ownership or debt arising from that institution. There is no legal instrument in any federal or territorial jurisdiction under which Mr. Briggs owes you anything. What you are doing right now is called intimidation. It is not legal. I suggest you leave. Silence. Breckett looked at her, at Sam, at the room that was now watching. He left. The bell above the door rang twice, then quiet. Sam stood still for another moment. Then he turned and looked at her. She picked up her flour. Thank you, he said, low and private. You don't need to thank me. That's just the law. He looked at her for a moment. A lot of people know the law, he said. Not everyone uses it. She understood what he meant. Knowledge alone doesn't protect anyone. Knowledge has to become action before it does anything useful. And action requires deciding that the person in front of you is worth the discomfort of speaking up. That decision, in that store, with 6 people watching, 4 of whom had chosen the same comfortable silence that had protected Clem Dawes for 2 years and shielded Edward Hartwell for 4, was not a small one. She hoped they felt the difference that night. Cole got the papers done before supper. He rode to town, filed Sam's freedom documentation formally in the county record, came back covered in trail dust and said nothing about it until Sam asked at the table what took him so long. Your name needed to be in the public record, Cole said. Not in my files. In the courthouse, where it stays. Sam looked at him across the table. You didn't have to do that. I know. That was the end of it. Eliza watched both of them and thought about what that meant, the difference between private goodwill and public documentation. Goodwill lived in one man's conscience. It changed when the man changed. A courthouse record didn't change. It was there whether the goodwill was or not. That was something her father had said once. She hadn't fully understood it until right now, after supper. Pearl left, and the dishes were done, and the house was quiet. Eliza sat across from Cole at the table. She'd been thinking about how to say this since Thursday. Since she found the letter 3 weeks ago and put it in the envelope in her room and waited until she understood the whole shape of it, she was ready now. There's something I need to tell you, she said. 2 things. One I found, one I've been carrying. He set down his pencil and gave her his full attention. She laid the letter on the table between them. Douglas Hartwell isn't here for justice, she said. He's here because you're fighting a water rights case against a man who is in business with him. If your challenge to Sloan's survey succeeds, the railway's land acquisition program along the Gallatin corridor loses its most valuable tract. He came to discredit your wife so that anything she contributed to your legal challenge can be called into question. Cole read the letter. Read it again. You've had this for 3 weeks, he said. I needed to understand the full picture before I said anything. That's a very lawyer thing to do. My father's voice comes out sometimes. He set the letter down. And the second thing, she folded her hands on the table, looked at them for a moment. Then she told him Boston. Not all of it. The deepest part wasn't ready yet. But the structure of it, the facts in order, the way she'd practiced delivering them enough times that she could get through without falling apart. She told him about the marriage. The first year that wasn't terrible and wasn't good. The second year when the control got heavier money. Friendships, opinions, space, all of it narrowing. The third year when Edward started hitting her. And always with a reason. Always something she'd done. And she'd kept adjusting. And the reasons kept finding her anyway, because the reasons were never actually the point. She told him about the staircase. January. The particular kind of mood she'd learned to read hours ahead. And the night she'd read it and tried to get to the door anyway. And he'd grabbed her arm and she'd pulled away. And then there was nothing under her feet. She told him about lying on the floor at the bottom. About Edward coming down, looking at her, stepping over her, and walking out the front door. She told him about Edward's heart giving out 4 days later. About the family's version of events, neat and complete, before she'd been able to sit upright. About Douglas at the funeral with his hand on her arm and his voice polite and utterly without warmth. There will need to be questions answered. About $35 and 2 dresses and a train through Illinois in January with 3 cracked ribs and nowhere safe to land. She told it like a case, because if she told it like a person, she wouldn't finish. Cole didn't move through any of it. When she stopped, he was quiet for a moment. He hired Breckett to test us, he said, to see if this community would stand up for someone, to see if I was the kind of man who would. Yes. And you've been carrying both of those things since you found that letter. Yes. He looked at the table, then up at her. I'm not going to ask you to leave. She'd braced for a lot of responses. That one hit differently than she expected. Whatever you came here carrying, he said, you have not been a burden. You sat at this table and gave me the legal argument I'd been missing for 8 months. You stood up in that general store today when no one else did. His jaw worked once. You have been exactly who this ranch needed. She pressed her lips together, looked away. Eliza, I'm all right. I know you are, he said. That's not in question. Monday morning. Cold and clear. Eliza had asked to repair the fence section along the near pasture. A practical contribution, something her hands could do. Cole had showed her where the tools were and left her to it, which was the correct response, and she appreciated it. She was making good progress when the ground dipped. One bad step, her foot found the hollow under the frost, and her weight shifted wrong, and she caught herself on the post. Saved the fall, but wrenched her shoulder going down and sat down hard on the frozen ground anyway. Because the jolt had lit up her ribs, she sat there, just for a minute, just until the white flash passed. Cole came around the corner of the barn on his way back from the south pasture and saw her sitting in the dirt. He didn't run. He walked over and crouched down in front of her, eye level. What happened? Ground, dip. Caught myself wrong. Your shoulder. Yes, can I look? She hesitated. One breath. Yes. He checked it the same way Agnes had checked her ribs, methodical, purposeful, asking before each movement. Here, does that pull? A little. I'm going to rotate it slightly. Tell me when. He was not using the examination to be close to her. He was examining her shoulder. There was a difference, and she felt it clearly. But his hands were careful in a way that went past the practical. Not careful because he was worried about hurting her. Careful because she was what he was attending to. All of it. Not just the injury. Not dislocated. Strained, probably. You should rest it today. I'll finish the fence. Rest the shoulder today. He stood and held out his hand to help her up. She took it when she was upright and steady. He didn't let go right away, and she didn't release either. About 2 seconds longer than the situation required. Then she did. He did. Neither of them mentioned it. She walked back to the house and sat at the kitchen table with her coffee and her hand resting in her lap and thought about the fact that a person had just touched her, and her whole body had not tried to leave the room. That was new. She sat with it carefully, like something that could startle. 3 nights later, a mare went into labor, and it wasn't going well. Cole and Sam were in the barn by 9. Eliza could hear it from the house, the mare's distress, low and insistent through the dark. She lay in bed for an hour trying to sleep, and finally stopped trying. She put on her coat and her boots and went out. Nobody had asked her. She just came. She found them in the far stall, the lantern throwing long shadows, Sam kneeling, Cole at the mare's head, both of them focused and quiet and working. Eliza took in the situation, found a hay bale out of the way, and sat down. She didn't offer advice, didn't insert herself, just was there. After a while, she started talking to Sam. Nothing important. A story about her father and a land case. Everyone in Boston told him was unwinnable, a railroad company, and a widow, and a boundary dispute that went to the territorial court 3 times before her father found the provision that changed everything. She told it quietly, just filling the air, not performing it. But the mare settled slightly. The quality of the room changed. Sam glanced over once. With something in his expression she chose not to examine too closely. At 4 in the morning, the foal hit the ground. They waited. At 4:15, it stood up, first one leg, then 2, then all 4, shaking and absolutely committed to the structural integrity of its own existence. Sam made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something he didn't have a name for. Eliza was watching the foal, and her face had no armor in it whatsoever. No performance. No management. Just the actual thing, something very close to joy. Unguarded and clean. Cole saw it. He didn't say anything about it. Filed it somewhere and kept moving. They walked back to the house in the early gray light, all 3 of them, smelling of barn and not saying much. Eliza went inside first. Cole stopped on the porch, looking east where the sky was going pale and cold. Sam stood beside him. She's good, Sam said, not asking, just saying. Cole didn't answer. He kept looking east. 3 nights after that, Pearl came. Not a knock. A presence on the porch, that particular kind of silence that meant someone had gotten as far as the door. and couldn't make themselves go the rest of the way. Biscuit found her first. He went to the door and sat down and wagged his tail, softly, none of the frantic energy he brought to everything else. Just slow, steady thumping. Patient. Eliza opened the door. Pearl was standing on the porch with her older child on her hip, and the younger one asleep against her shoulder. The night was cold. She hadn't brought much. Her face said everything. Eliza stepped aside. Pearl came in. The children went onto the floor with a blanket, and Biscuit positioned himself between them and the door with the serious focus of an animal that understood its assignment. They sat at the kitchen table. Eliza put water on. Pearl didn't say anything yet. That was fine. The saying could wait. Cole came in 20 minutes later from checking the stock. He read the room in about 3 seconds. He looked at the children on the floor, looked at Pearl, looked at Eliza. "I'll sort out the storage room," he said. "No questions, no conditions. Know how long are you planning to stay, or does your husband know where you are?" He went to get blankets from the chest in the hallway. "You don't have to," Pearl started. "It's a storage room," Cole said. "It'll be better used as a room." He went and made it into one. Pearl watched him go. Then she looked at Eliza. He didn't ask. Pearl said, quiet, like she was verifying something she wasn't sure she'd seen correctly. "No," Eliza said. "Clem would have asked. He would have asked a lot of things." "I know." Pearl looked at her hands on the table. "How do you know what a person is?" she said. Not really a question. More like something she was working out. Before it's too late to know. Eliza thought about it honestly. "I think you watch what they do when they have a choice," she said. "Anyone can be decent when it costs them nothing. The telling part is what they do when it costs something. When they could look away, and they don't." Pearl was quiet. Outside, the wind moved through the pines. Inside, the children slept on the floor, and Biscuit kept watch, and Cole made up a bed in the storage room with no fanfare and no audience. The telling part is what they do when they could look away. Late that night, when Pearl's children were settled and Sam had gone to the bunkhouse, Eliza was at the table with the water rights documents. She'd been drafting the formal legal challenge for 3 days, building it, the way her father had taught her, layer by layer, each argument supporting the next. Cole came out for water. He stood at the counter and drank it. Then he stood there a moment longer. She had her head bent over the papers, a strand of hair across her forehead that she was ignoring, ink on her fingers, the lamp catching her profile. He opened his mouth. Something moved in his expression. He closed it. "Did you need something?" she asked, without looking up. "No," he said. "Good night." He went back to his room. She watched the door for a moment. Then she went back to the papers. She wasn't sure what he'd almost said. She had an idea. She didn't reach for it yet, but it stayed in the room after he left warm. Careful, unspoken, and she was aware of it the whole time she worked. Douglas Hartwell came to the ranch on a Tuesday. Didn't send word ahead. Men like Douglas never did. They arrived because they expected to be received. Cole met him in the yard. Douglas was dressed for Boston. Dark coat, polished boots that were already wrong for the mud. He stood with the patience of a man who had prepared what he was going to say and was waiting for the appropriate moment to say it. He didn't lead with accusations. That was the thing about Douglas. He was too smart for accusations. He dealt in versions. Edward had not been well. The family had known that. They'd managed it privately, the way decent families manage difficult things. Eliza had been. Douglas paused here, chose his words with care, challenging in ways that put additional strain on a man who was already fragile. The incident on the staircase was more complex than any single account could represent. He wasn't asking Cole to make a judgment. He was simply sharing information, family to family. Then, almost as an afterthought, she received a settlement from the estate before she left. $300, voluntarily paid. "I thought you should know that," given that she arrived claiming she had nothing. Cole said nothing. "She's a complicated woman," Douglas said. "I'm sure you've discovered that yourself." Cole walked to the gate and held it open. I appreciate you making the trip. Reverend. His voice was entirely neutral. Good day. Douglas looked at him for a moment, calculating. Then he left. He'd planted what he came to plant. Both of them knew it. That evening, at supper, Cole was quieter than usual. Not angry, not cold, just inward. Working through something he hadn't resolved. Chewing it over the way he chewed over everything. Privately, behind a face that didn't advertise much, Eliza noticed within the first 5 minutes. She'd spent 4 years developing a precise alarm system for the silence of men. She could not switch it off because she'd decided to trust someone. The body didn't work that way. It had learned what it learned, and it kept applying it whether she wanted it to or not. She watched Cole across the table and felt the familiar cold begin in her stomach. He is not Edward, she told herself. He's not Edward. She knew that. She believed it the way you believe a fact, logically, from evidence, with reasons behind it. She did not yet know it the way you know something's safe. There was a difference. She was still crossing the distance between the two. After supper, Cole went back outside. She cleared the table, washed the dishes alone. That night, for the first time in 3 weeks, she slid the bolt. She didn't decide to. Her hand just moved, and the bolt moved, and she stood in the dark, on the other side of it. I thought I was learning the difference, she thought. Maybe I was wrong. He was up before dawn. As always. Coffee, boots, out to the barn. He passed her door on the way. The bolt was closed. He stood in the hallway and looked at it for a long moment. Then he went outside. He was in the barn for an hour. When he came back in, he poured 2 cups of coffee and sat down at the table in his own chair, not hers, and waited. When she came out, he was sitting there with both cups, and his face was open in a way it wasn't always. She saw the cups. She saw his face. She understood that he knew. I should have come to you last night, he said. Hartwell told me something. I sat with it instead of telling you. I went quiet. You noticed. And I know what my silence feels like to you, even when that's not what I mean by it. She sat down slowly. He said you received $300, Rendo, from the estate, Cole said. Before you left Boston. Yes, she said. I did. You said you left with $35. I did. I used the $300 to pay the doctor who treated me after the staircase, and to pay back wages to the woman who had worked in our house for 4 years while Edward shorted her pay every month from year 2 onward. There was nothing left by the time I bought the train ticket west. Cole looked at her steadily. Then he nodded once. I should have asked you, he said, instead of sitting with it and letting you feel my uncertainty. That was wrong, and I'm not going to do it again. Something shifted in Eliza's chest, complicated and quiet. You could have, she said, asked. I know. I'm sorry. She looked at him directly. He held her eyes. No deflection. No rushing past it to smoother ground. Just sitting with the weight of it until she was ready to move. All right, she said. She reached out and wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. Cole. Yes, don't go quiet on me like that again. I won't. She believed him. Not because he'd promised, because he'd noticed what he did, said it plainly, and changed course. That was different from a promise. A promise was words. What he'd just done was something else. That night, she didn't slide the bolt. Cole sat alone in the barn for an hour. That evening, after the stock was settled, he thought about his father. Rufus Maddox's silences had been a specific thing, the drop in pressure before weather. Everyone in the house had learned to read them, his mother moving quietly, taking up less space, young Cole tracking the signs, calculating, staying out of rooms. Cole had spent 22 years making sure he was not that, making sure his silences were just silences, making sure the only thing building behind them was thought, not storm. What he hadn't done was consider how his silence landed on someone who'd spent 4 years decoding exactly what that pressure meant. A man going quiet at supper was not a man thinking. It was a man building towards something, and she had no way to know the difference, except time, except evidence, except him doing the thing he'd told her he would do, not sitting with the uncertainty, but saying it. He thought about Clara at the bedside, her voice asking the question, his mouth failing her. He was not going to sit in silence again while something that needed to be said went unsaid. He wasn't going to make her prove safe enough to be given information that affected her. He wasn't going to manage his own discomfort by going quiet and call it patience. That was not patience. He understood that now. It was a kind of keeping, and she had been kept enough. He blew out the barn lamp, walked back to the house through the cold. Inside, the fire was low, and the house was quiet, and Eliza's door was closed but unbolted. And that small difference, the bolt not thrown, was something he carried with him into his room and held on to. She was still here. So was he. That was going to have to be enough for tonight. And tomorrow, he would do better. And the day after that, he would do better still. Not because he'd decided to be a good man in the abstract, because she was specific and real. And she had trusted him with something fragile, and he understood now what that cost her. He was not going to be the reason she slid that bolt again. The external danger had gone quiet. Douglas wasn't making moves. The legal challenge was filed and traveling toward Helena. Pearl's children had learned where Biscuit slept and visited him every morning like it was a job. The railway letter was in the envelope in Eliza's room. The pressure had lifted, which left only the two people in the house and what was actually between them. Pearl asked her on a Wednesday morning, while the children played under the table, with a wooden spoon and a tin cup Cole had found somewhere. "When did you know you were going to be okay?" Eliza was at the stove. She turned the question over honestly. "I don't think there was a moment," she said. "I think I noticed I was okay when I looked back at a time when I wasn't. Like you can't see a shadow while you're standing in it." Pearl was quiet. "So you just wait. You just live. And then, one day, the living has changed." Pearl looked at her hands on the table. "Agnes told me healing doesn't have a schedule." "Agnes is right," Eliza said. "And nobody is required to prove they were hurt badly enough to deserve help. That's not how rights work. You don't earn safety. You're supposed to already have it." The younger child banged the tin cup on the floor. Biscuit opened one eye and closed it again. Agnes came by that afternoon to check on Pearl and said it plainly, the way Agnes said everything. "I have seen women leave situations like yours and be fine in 6 months. I have seen women still working through it at 60. Both of those are correct. Healing is not a competition. It is not a performance. Anyone who tells you otherwise is asking you to take care of their discomfort instead of your own actual recovery." Pearl looked at her for a long moment. "So there's no wrong way to do it. There are unhealthy patterns we can address as they come up," Agnes said. "But no, there's no wrong timeline. Anyone who gives you one isn't helping you. They're managing you." She packed her bag and left. Eliza stood in the kitchen after and thought about that, about the difference between being helped and being managed. She'd spent 4 years being managed, being told how she felt, being handed timelines for her own interior life. Nobody was going to do that to Pearl, if she could help it. She found the cedar box by accident. She was getting extra blankets from the storage room. Pearl's younger one had kicked his off in the night, and she reached up to the high shelf and felt the weight of it before she saw it. Small, neat, carefully kept. She brought it to the main room and set it on the table. Didn't open it. It wasn't hers. Cole came in from the barn and stopped. A stillness moved across his face, the kind that went deep. He crossed to the table, put one hand on the lid. Didn't open it. "I should have moved that long ago," he said. "I'm sorry you found it." "Don't," Eliza said. She was standing near the window. She'd been thinking about how to say this since she found it. She was here. "That's not something to apologize for. You brought me into a house where someone else lived and loved, and that doesn't mean I don't belong here. Those two things can both be true." He looked at her. "I didn't know how to say that," she said, "but it's true." He was quiet for a moment. She would have liked you, he said, Clara. She had no patience for pretending. She would have liked that you don't either. Eliza looked at her hands. Something moved in her chest. That's the kindest thing you've said to me. I mean it. They stood there, the two of them, and Clara in the room between them. Not a ghost, not a rival, just a person who had been loved, and two people who were still here, standing in the same kitchen, finding their way. Cole picked up the box and put it in his room where it belonged. That evening, Eliza made supper, not the practical kind, not beans and cornbread, because nobody had thought about food. She'd been planning it for 3 days. Venison stew with dried herbs from the kitchen garden, biscuits from scratch, apple preserves. From the root cellar, she'd found them last week, untouched, and thought he probably hadn't opened them yet. Cole came in from the barn and stopped in the doorway. He looked at the table, looked at her. You didn't have to, I wanted to, she said. Simple, no explanation behind it. He sat down, served himself. Didn't make it a moment. About 4 minutes in. This is the best thing I've had at this table in 3 years. Don't oversell it. I'm not. She looked up. He was looking at her with the expression she'd been watching. Grover Weeks warm and unguarded, and aimed entirely at her, like she was the fixed point, and everything else moved around her. She looked back down at her bowl, but she was smiling, and she didn't try to stop it. After supper, dishes done, Pearl's children asleep, Sam in the bunkhouse. They were at the table with legal papers between them. Neither of them was looking at the papers. Cole, she said, can I tell you something? Yes, she didn't look at him. She looked at her hands. There were nights in Boston where I believed him. She said it plain. No preamble. Not everything, but some of it. There were nights I thought, maybe I am too difficult. Maybe I make things harder than they need to be. Maybe I am the problem. Her voice was steady. She'd held herself together to say this much. I know it isn't true. I've known it a long time, intellectually. But 4 years of someone telling you something, even someone you've stopped believing, leaves a mark, like a water stain on wood. The water's gone, but the mark stays. She finally looked up. I never told anyone that. Not Agnes. Not Hattie. I've been carrying the facts of what happened. But this the part where I wondered if he was right. I kept that to myself, because I was afraid if I said it out loud, someone would find the part they could use against me. Cole hadn't moved, and I want to stop keeping it, she said. I want to say it, and have it be something that existed and was wrong, and isn't mine to carry alone anymore. He was quiet for a moment. Then Eliza. Yes, how long? She frowned slightly. How long what? How long have you been carrying that alone? She hadn't prepared for that question. She'd prepared for disbelief, for judgment, for a man trying to figure out what this meant for him. She had not prepared for that small, direct aimed, precisely at the loneliest part of her. The tears came before she could stop them. Not controlled grief, not the quiet kind she allowed herself in her room at night. This came from somewhere deeper, from the place she'd sealed off and armored because nobody in Boston had thought to ask. 3 years, she said, and her voice broke on it. I've been carrying it alone for 3 years. He was out of his chair before her next breath. Not rushing, not crowding. He moved his chair to her side of the table and sat beside her, not touching her, just close, warm, present, the solid, specific weight of someone who was not going anywhere. You're allowed to set it down, he said quietly. You don't have to keep holding it. She put both hands over her face and let it come. She cried for the staircase, for the $35, for the train through Illinois in January with 3 broken ribs and no safe place to land, for the doctor who moved her like furniture. For every morning, she woke up in Edward's house and talked herself into one more day. She cried until it was finished. When she lowered her hands, Cole was still there, still close. Nothing that happened to you is your fault, he said. You don't know every detail yet. Doesn't matter. He put his hands on you. That is entirely his. Nothing before or after it changes what that is. She shook her head, not disagreeing, just overwhelmed by the absence of conditions. She had lived inside conditions for 4 years. If you'd been different, if you'd adjusted, if only the absence of them was almost too much. We deal with Douglas, she said, because practical was safer right now. Yes, he said, together. You know the law. I know this county. Whatever he tries to build from Boston, we have the ground right here. She looked at him. He looked back. I'm not going to ask you to leave, he said. She already knew that, but it was good to hear. The church meeting came first. Douglas had arranged it through the minister, framed it as a community concern. Eliza heard about it from Agnes on a Thursday and had until Sunday to decide what to do. She could stay home. She went. Douglas was precise. That was the thing about him. He didn't accuse, he suggested. He didn't defame. He raised questions. He used the conditional tense like a blade. Each perhaps, and one wonders. And it seems reasonable to ask landing clean and leaving no obvious wound. When he finished, Eliza stood up. She didn't raise her voice. She used the voice that had been finding its way back to her since October, her father's voice, her own voice. The voice of someone who had stopped apologizing for what she knew. I want to clarify something before we go further. We're gathered here to discuss whether I deserve a place in this community. I'd like to ask Reverend Hartwell in front of all of you to confirm whether his name appears on the investor registry of the Northern Pacific Railway subsidiary that employs Harvey Sloan. She set the letter on the table between them. I found this in correspondence already collected as part of my husband's legal challenge. This is not about me. It has never been about me. It is about 12 miles of water rights along the Gallatin River. And the fact that my husband is correctly and legally challenging the fraud used to steal them. I am the most convenient way to discredit that challenge. I am standing here because I will not allow that to happen quietly. The room shifted. Martha Oakes, 51, school teacher in Redemption Creek since 1000. 871 stood up. We've been asked to question this woman on behalf of a man who wants her husband's water rights. I've known Cole Maddox 9 years. I know what I saw her do at the general store for Sam Briggs. I know what she's done for Pearl Dawes. The woman standing up there right now isn't doing it for herself. She looked around the room. I stand with Mrs. Maddox, then Dale Whitfield, then Jonas Park, then others, slowly. Not everyone. Never everyone, but enough. Enough that Douglas looked around the room and calculated. He picked up his hat and walked out. He didn't leave town. He rode to the neighboring county and filed a formal inquiry with Federal Marshal Roy Tanner requesting a preliminary interview with Eliza Hartwell regarding the death of Edward Hartwell of Boston. Supporting documents. Selectively quoted physician's letter. 2 affidavits from Boston associates. The summons arrived at the ranch 2 days later. Eliza was at the door before the writer fully stopped. She read it twice, set it down. Then she picked up the 12-page document she'd been building for 6 weeks. Water rights challenge. Sloan's fraud. The railway letter. The timeline of her injuries and Edward's death. She read it one more time and picked up her pen. Added 4 lines at the bottom. Eliza Ann Hartwell, née Crane, daughter of Richard Crane, attorney at law, Boston, Massachusetts, deceased 1876. She had just put her name in the permanent record, stepped out of silence, and into something that couldn't be undone. Her hands were steady. Good, she thought. Cole rode with her to the county seat, beside her, not in front. Marshal Tanner was 50. Weathered, unhurried. He had the look of a man who'd seen plenty of people from the East arrive with documents and had learned to read the difference between law and leverage. He read Eliza's file, all 12 pages, slowly. He read the railway letter, the medical documentation, the affidavit in the Montana territorial record. He set it down and looked at Douglas's inquiry and looked at Eliza. Anything to add to what's in here? No, sir. It's complete. He placed his hand on her file. I'll be sending a response to Reverend Hartwell. He's traveled a significant distance to file an inquiry that this document addresses conclusively if he has evidence of an actual crime. The appropriate jurisdiction is Boston, where the events occurred. He paused. Montana doesn't have a dog in that fight. He stood, shook her hand. Your father taught you well, he said. She did not cry. It was close. Douglas received the response at his hotel that afternoon. He sat with it a long time. Then he went to find Sloan, who had already received word from Helena that a formal review of his survey conduct had been initiated. Douglas rode out of Redemption Creek the following morning. He didn't say goodbye to anyone. He didn't have what he'd come for. The cost of continuing had exceeded the prize. Eliza didn't feel triumph when Agnes told her. She felt something quieter, more durable than triumph. The particular settled weight of a person who spoke the truth in a room full of people and was still standing when it was done. That was enough. That was more than enough. The ruling came in a formal envelope addressed to Cole Maddox. He brought it in from the post and set it on the table in front of Eliza. Without opening it, they both understood, without saying it, that this was something they opened together. She slit the envelope. Read it. Read it again. The survey is invalidated, she said. New survey ordered at Sloan's expense. Sloan referred to the Territorial Attorney General for review of conduct. She looked up. The Gallatin Creek water rights are confirmed as belonging to Absolution Ranch. Cole put both hands over his face. She watched him. Watched 8 months of it leave his body in one long exhale. A loosening in the shoulders. The private relief of a man who has been carrying something long enough that he'd forgotten what setting it down felt like when he lowered his hands. His eyes were bright. We did that, he said. Yes, she said. We did. Pearl's protective order came through the territorial court the following week. One of the first of its kind in Montana County records. She'd started working afternoons at Agnes's clinic learning, asking questions, finding out that she knew more than she'd been allowed to know. Clem Dawes hadn't come back to the ranch. Whether he returned to Redemption Creek at all was a matter the town had made clear. It was watching. Sam's papers were in the county record. Cole gave him a 10% partnership stake in the cattle operation on a Thursday morning at the kitchen table formal document. Witnessed. Filed. Sam read it twice and sat very still in the way he sat when he was receiving something he'd wanted for a long time and had learned not to want visibly. You didn't have to do this, Sam said. You've been building this place for 9 years. Cole said, your name should be on part of it. Hattie walked over from her house that evening, sat at the kitchen table, drank her coffee, and said all right. That was her version of a celebration. Everyone who knew her understood that. The week after the ruling, Cole Sam rode to the eastern boundary. New survey stakes, clean cedar, still pale against the frozen ground. The Gallatin running clear and cold below the ridge. Sam put his hand on the corner post, held it there, looked east across the open country for a long time. Eliza stood a few steps back and watched his face. I came here thinking maybe Montana had enough space for a person to be what they were, Sam said, not to Cole, not to her, just out loud, to the land that was partly his now. Turns out that's not automatic. Turns out you have to build the space, and it helps to have people who'll build it with you. Cole stood beside him and looked east. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Eliza stood behind them both and felt something she didn't have a word for. Something about the difference between surviving somewhere and belonging somewhere, between enduring ground and claiming it. She understood that difference now from the inside. Late November. Kitchen table. The land maps replaced by a spring grazing plan. Practical. Forward-looking. The lamp between them. Coffee gone cold, because neither of them had remembered to drink it. Cole set down the pencil. When I wrote to the agency, he said, I asked for a woman who could help with the ranch and the house. I was specific. Eliza looked up. I was wrong about what I needed. He looked at her directly. What I needed was someone who sits at this table and fights for the same ground I'm fighting for. Someone who stands up in a room full of people using her father's voice when it would have been easier to stay quiet. Someone who comes to the barn at 2 in the morning because she heard something and decided to help. He stopped. Then, someone I can't stop thinking about every time I leave this table. Eliza was very still. I'm not asking you to feel anything you don't feel. I know where you've been and what it cost to get here. I'm telling you what I feel. Because you told me once you'd rather be asked straight than have someone tiptoeing. I'm not going to tell you I'm not afraid, she said. I know. I'm not asking you not to be. I need time. Real time. We're in Montana, he said. Time is the one thing we have plenty of. She almost laughed. Not performed. Not offered to fill space. Just almost real. He saw her catch it, and something in his face shifted. Warm and open and certain. All right, she said. All right, he repeated, making sure. All right, clearly, yes. He reached across the table and set his hand between the maps and the coffee cups. Palm up, open. She looked at it for a moment. Then she put her hand in his. His fingers closed. Not gripping, not pulling, just closing the way you close your hand around something you mean to keep. December 31st. Everyone asleep or settled. Biscuit on the porch, doing his job. Cole was at the table with a clean sheet of paper. Eliza came out and looked over his shoulder. Who to the agency? I want to tell them it works. That people can come here, honestly, and build something real. She read the first paragraph. Did we come here honestly? He thought about it. Eventually, he said. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. He turned and looked at her with the expression she'd stopped trying to name, warm and certain, and aimed entirely at her. Happy New Year, she said. Happy New Year. Eliza, she sat down beside him, not across, beside. He moved the lamp so it fell between them equally. They finished the letter together. Later, letter sealed, fire low. She came back from checking Pearl's children and found Cole at the window looking north. Snowing, he said. She stood beside him. The Montana dark was enormous out there. Stars so dense they looked like something you could reach. Cole, I can breathe. He turned. What? I keep checking. Since Agnes said they'd healed, I keep pressing my side waiting for the burn. And it isn't there. It's just ribs. They're just ribs again. She pressed her hand flat against her right side. Breathed in. Deep, full. The way she hadn't been able to breathe since January. Nothing stopped her. That's good, he said. His voice slightly rougher than usual. It's very good, she said. He looked at her the way a man looks at someone he cares about when they set something heavy down. Then he turned back to the window. She stood beside him. Outside, snow fell on Absolution Ranch. The Gallatin ran cold and clear under the ice. The land held everything it held. She breathed in again. Because she could. Because nothing was stopping her anymore. In the quiet aftermath of storms, both seen and unseen, we are often left standing in the space between who we were forced to become and who we are finally allowed to be. Eliza Hartwell's journey is not just a story of escape, but a slow return to herself, piece by fragile piece, in a land that does not demand her silence, only her truth. Through the wide fields of Montana, she learned something she'd never given the chance to believe before. That safety is not something a woman must earn, and trust is not a reward for perfect behavior, but a basic condition of being human. She meets people who do not try to fix her by controlling her, but instead choose to stand beside her, to listen before judging, and to act when action matters more than comfort. And in that difference lies the heart of this story. Cole does not save Eliza. He creates the space where she can begin to save herself. Hattie, Agnes, Sam, Pearl, each of them in their own way, remind her that pain does not disqualify a person from dignity, and survival is not the end of healing, but the beginning of learning how to live without fear as a constant companion. The real transformation is not dramatic or sudden. It is quiet. It is found in moments like a bolt sliding back into place without hesitation, a cup of coffee waiting without expectation, a hand offered without force. If there is a lesson to carry from this story, it is this: healing does not arrive as a single decision, but as a series of small, repeated truths spoken, witnessed, and believed. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is not to rescue someone from their past, but to stand with them long enough that they no longer have to carry it alone. The opinions, actions, and decisions expressed by the characters in this story do not reflect the views or beliefs of the author. Certain scenes may contain dramatic situations, emotional conflict, or morally complex behavior intended solely to serve the fictional storyline and enhance the audience viewing experience.